All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Shvat. To thank the Elbaum Mishpacha for dedicating the Shiurim and Drashos this month in memory of beloved husband and father Jerry Yaakov Koppelbin Avram Menachem, as well as to thank Mrs. Bracha Strimber for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drashos this month in memory of her husband Avi Strimber, Avram Ben Kalman Eliezer Halevi, on the occasion of his 9th yahrzeit. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah, and the families in Nechama. Also with that, let us begin. So we have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, in a really incredible and exciting sugya. So today's daf is Pei Aleph 81. We are picking up Emir Hashem on Pei Amud Beis at the two dots. At the two dots, Nitma Tumas Hatahom. So if you remember again, so the Mishnah speaking about halachas of Tumah, specifically again circumstances under which the carbon Pesach could be offered up in a state of Tumah, and halacha l'maisa, the tzitz would be meratzeh. So remember, the Mishnah made a distinction between Tumas HaPesach and Tumas HaBailin. Right? So for example, if the Pesach was accidentally offered up in a state of Tumah, in other words, when I say accidentally, the Pesach was Tameh, you didn't know it until after the Zriga, the tzitz is meratzeh. Right? So the tzitz has the ability to affect atonement. But conversely, Nitma Haguf, but let's say it turns out that the owner of the Pesach, right, the Bailim, the Baal, or someone in the Chabura was Tameh, the tzitz is not meratzah for that, right? So the tzitz could take care of the tumah of the carbon, the tzitz does not take care of the tumah of the individual, of the owner. So the Gemara says, so the Mishnah says as follows. The Mishnah then goes on to explain, Nitma Tumas Hatahom, if there was Tumas Hatahom, which we'll define in just a moment, the tzitz is also meratzah for that. The tzitz is meratzah for that. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara explains. So remember, we saw in yesterday that Rashi had a definition of tumas hatahom, which effectively was tumas safek. Tumas safek, right? Doubtful tumah. Now, we'll say, as we're going to go through the sugya, we're going to see that's not really the definition, even that the Gemara itself accepts. That really, tumas hatoma, we'll say, means tuma that pretty much you could not have known about. Right? Tuma that is just not readily observable, and the truth is, a person could just not have known about. There was no way for you to really be vigilant about the avoidance of this tuma. We're going to see, it's interesting to see that Rashi translates this as tumas safek, when we're going to see the Gemara pretty explicitly utilizes the definition I just used for you, and that's what the Rambam is going to do as well. So again, let's begin this interesting sugya. Says the Gemara, Nitma Tumas Hatahom. So says the Gemara, Boy Rami Bar Chama Koin Hamarat Seber Kamano Sehen Hutra Lo Tumas Hatahom Olo. So what's an interesting shaila over here? So Bar Chama asks as follows: what about a Kohen who goes ahead and performs the service of the karbanos? So the shaila is Tumas Hatahom, does Tumas Hatahom work for him or not? When I say work for him, we'll say, what happens if a Kohen is impacted by Tumas Hatahom? Does the tzitz have the ability to be meratzeh for that or not? So we'll say, so what's interesting about this is as follows. Is that halacha l'maisa, we're assuming that when the Mishnah says that tzitz is meratzeh for tumas hatahom, what does it refer to? Bepashtos, the carbon pesach. Right? That's bepashtos what it's referring to over here. The shaila is, what happens if the Kohen who's doing the avoda, what happens if he contracts tumas tahom? Right? He contracts tumah from this unknown or quote-unquote unavoidable, when I say unavoidable is a little too dramatic, but we'll call it unavoidable source. Is the tzitz meratzeh for that as well? So the Gemara says, Mi amrinan ki gemiri tumas hatahom bebailim. I'm sorry, do we say that tumas hatahom only applies to the owner, or is not just the carbon pesach, but the owner itself? Bekoin lo gemiri, but it doesn't apply to a kohen. When I say doesn't apply, both say meaning the notion that the tzitz is meratzeh on tumas hatahom. Is that just a din by the owners of the animal, or right? Dilma bizvachim gemiri loshna bekoin loshna bailam, or maybe no, maybe tumas hatahom is a din in karbanos, and it doesn't make a difference whoever is involved in the carbon. So whether it's the owner or whether it is the Kohen, that sits is Meratza on Tumas Adam. So we'll say, so just to give you the construct that the Mishnah is operating with, right? So we'll say the Mishnah introduced us to the idea that sits is Meratza on Tumah. Then the Mishnah says, okay, what type of Tumah is the tzitz meratza on? And the answer is, the tzitz is meratza on tumah of the carbon, not tumah of the owner. Then effectively the Mishnah says, by the way, there's one exception to that rule. What's the one exception to that rule? Tumas hatahom. Tumas hatahom. Tumas hatahom, which is a tumas haguf, the tzitz is meratza. So when we speak about tumas hatahom, who do we assume we're referring to? We assume we're referring to the owners. So if the owner, I'll give you just a simple example, right? Reuben is bringing his Karban Pesach, and then it turns out he was sitting on a pile of stones, pile of rocks, and lo and behold, underneath that pile of rocks was a corpse. There was no way he could have known that there was a corpse. There's no reason to assume that there was a corpse there. But it turns out that he sat over a corpse, and therefore he's Tamei Tumas Meis. That's Tumas Hatzahom. That's Tumas Hatzahom. So therefore, the Mishnah speaks about this. The classic understanding is it's a reference to the owners of the animal. Now the shaila is, what happens if the Kohen who's offering up the Karban Pesach, what happens if he contracts Tumas Hatzahom and then offered up the Pesach? Is the tzitz meratza on the Kohen, or is the tzitz meratza for Tumas Hatzahom only for the bailim, only for the owner? That's the shaila. Amar Rav, so let's analyze. Tashma, the Tani Rabbi Chia, lo amru Tumas Hatzahom, ela lemeis bilvad. We only apply Tumas Tahom to Tumas Meis. That's the only type of Tumah that Tumas Hatzahom applies to. So the Gemara says, Meis, lemi'ute mai. What is this coming to exclude? Lav lemi'ute Tumas Hatzahom, the sheretz. So we'll say, B'pashtos, what this comes to exclude is Tumas Hatzahom of sheretz. Remember, we'll say, Tumas Hatzahom is a description. It's a description that an item that is tamei is hidden or obscured in a way that you really could not reasonably have known of its presence. So what the Gemara is suggesting is, well, maybe this concept only applies to Tumas Meis, doesn't apply to Tumas Sheretz. Umayaskina, what are we dealing with over here? Inema b'bailim, if you want to say it's the owner, ubiman, and what type of carbon? Ibn Nazir, mimahani bay. So we'll say, would it by Nazir, would this make any difference? After all, what does the pasuk say by Nazir? Ki yamus meis. I love Amrachmana. But remember again, by Nazir, the only type of tumah which deconstructs his neder nezirus is what? Tumas meis, not Tumas Sheretz. Elo ba'ose Pesach. Rather, it must be referring to someone who's making Karban Pesach. So again, Rabbi says, if you want to say that Allah Lamaisa, we're coming to learn that Tumas Hom does not apply to Tumas Sheretz, that works fine according to the opinion who says that Allah Lamaisa, technically speaking, you could go ahead and shecht and do zriko with Tumas Sheretz. Hashto tumi yedua hotralo Tumas hatahom lo kol shekain. If halacha lamaisa, we'll say you could even go ahead and do the Karban Pesach even when you explicitly know that you became tamei Tumas Sheretz, all the more so Tumas hatahom. Elalav bekoin, rather it must be referring to a koin. Ushmamina hutralo Tumas hatahom. And I will say it must be that the Bryce is coming to teach us that halacha lamaisa, the same way that the tzitz is miratza on Tumas Hatahom of the Bailim, of the owner of the carbon, so too the tzitz is Meratza on Tumas Hatahom of the Kohen. Ushmamina Hutralo Tumas Hatahom. Amr Rav Yossi. Yossi says, no, not necessarily. Lo the Olam B'Bailim, not true. Rather, again, it could very well be that the concept of Tumas Hatahom, or I should say the ability of the tzitz to be Meratza on Tumas Hatahom is only a din by the owners. Right, by the Bailim. So the Gemara says, and by Pesach, and maybe it's coming to exclude the following Rabbi saying that lest you think that Tumas Hatahom applies to other forms of Tumah. So let's say, for example, there was a situation of Tumas Ziva. Tumas Ziva, remember, I will say, technically speaking, you can go ahead and you could apply the definition, or I should say the construct of Tumas Hatahom to any form of Tumah. Let's say, for example, again, what's Tumas Hatahom of Ziva? So remember, if you go with Rashi's definition, it could be a case of Safek Tumah. That's probably the easiest way to illustrate it. The case of Safek Tumah, Otherwise, it could also be, remember, it's not just the person who experiences the emission who becomes Tamei Tumas Zav, but a person who comes in contact with that emission could also go ahead and become Tamei Tumas Zav. So says the Gemara, so perhaps it's coming to exclude Tumas Hatahom of Zivos. Okay, so therefore again, the Gemara says, Tumas Hatahom de Ziva lo meratze. Is that true? That Tumas Hatahom of Zivos, the tzitz, is not meratze. Is that true? Vatanya, we learned, Rabbi Yossi says, Shomeres Yom kineged Yom, Sheshachtu v'zarku aleha b'sheni shela, both the top of Pei Aleph. What about the following situation? Tumas hatohom of ziv. So we'll say, remember, let's keep focused over here. Here's what we know, and here's what we're trying to figure out. What I know is that if the owner of the Karban Pesach contracts Tumas Tahom, which I will say he becomes Tameh as a result of an exposure that he could not have really foreseen, and he ends up offering up the Karban Pesach in this state of Tumah, halacha l'maisa, the tzitz is meratza. Good, that's what I know. What we're now trying to find out is, what about a Kohen? What about if the Kohen contracted Tumas Hatahom, offered up the Karban Pesach, ex post facto is the tzitz meratza on that karban. Now, once the Gemara started going down that road, that then led to another question. What types of tumah are subject or are a part of the Tumas Hatahom category? So, for example, we know Tumas Meis, obviously. Tumas Sheretz, we're not sure. And now the Gemara asks, what about Tumas Ziva? So the Gemara says, is that true? V'tumas tahom deziva lo meratze. Is that true that if a person contracted tumas ziva, and it's the type of tumas ziva that's tumas hatahom, which again, like I just said before, makes sense if you're going according to Rashi's definition that it's tumas safek, or for that matter, you come in contact with the emission, but there was no way for you to foresee that could have occurred. So is that true? The Gemara says that the tzitz is not meratze. V'atanya, so I'm just reading the last line of Pei Beis. V'atanya Rabbi Yossi Omer, shomeres yom kineged yom, sheshachtu v'zarku ala, b'sheni shela, v'achar kach ra'asa. Well, listen to this interesting case. So shomeres yom kineged yom is the following halacha. If a woman has a zava emission, she has a zava emission, which will say, again, if you remember this from our Nida days, so remember again from a halachic perspective, this is we don't follow this pattern today, but again from a halachic perspective, there are certain days where if a woman bleeds, it's because she's a nida, and there are certain days of the month where if she bleeds, she becomes a zava. So the halacha is, when a woman has an emission and she is a zava, if she has just one emission, she's what's called shomeres yom keneged yom, which literally means she guards one day corresponding to another, which means that if she has an emission on one day, only thing she requires is one clean day, one emission-free day after that. So let's say again, she sees blood on Monday, so okay, she has to go ahead and observe Tuesday without dam. If she sees that there's no dam on Tuesday, she's fine. She's tahora. So the Gemara, goes to mikvah, she's tahora. So the Gemara says, so now the Gemara says as follows. What about the following case? Let's say you have a lady who's a shomeres yom kineged yom, which means she had an emission on Monday, and now Tuesday is her clean day. And what happens? Sheshachtu v'zarku ala. They offer up a karban on her behalf, b'sheni shela, on her second day, on her Tuesday, right? On Tuesday, which is the clean day. V'achar kach ra'asa. So they offer up a karban on her behalf on Tuesday, and after the karban, after the shchita and the zrika, she has another emission. So what's the halacha? Eino ochelas. So we'll say, just to illustrate this, she has her emission on Monday. Tuesday is Erev Pesach. So Tuesday morning, she's fine, right? Clean. She goes ahead. They do the shchita for her. So she's part of a chabura. They do shchita and zrika on her behalf. And then after they do the shchita and the zrika, what happens? She has another emission. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, Eno chalas. Obviously that night, which is now Pesach, she cannot go ahead. She cannot go ahead and eat the Karban Pesach, right? Because now she's Tameya. But yet, interestingly enough, for Petura Milasos Pesach Sheni. But yet, she's not obligated to make Pesach Sheni. So the Gemara says, my timer. Now, why is that? Lav mishum demeratz. That's it. Now, remember again, here's what's interesting about that case. Once she has that emission on Tuesday, then what's the status of Tuesday? Status of Tuesday is that now that's another day of Zivus. Right? That's another day of Zivus. See, interestingly enough, what we see over here is, even though Tuesday effectively became another day of Zivus, while it is true that she cannot eat the Karban Pesach that night, she doesn't have to bring Pesach Sheni, which is very interesting, which says that the Karban fulfilled her obligation. Now, how does that work? How could the Karban fulfill her obligation? It turns out that she was a Zava that day. Oh, so what do you see from here? It must be that the tzitz is meratza. And I both say, what do you see from here also? That the tzitz is meratza even on Tumas Ziva. To which the Gemara says, no, that's actually not what this is. Amri lo mishum dekasar Rabbi Yossi mikano lahabohi mitamet. That's not true. In fact, ultimately, what it really is because of another principle. Rabbi Yossi holds that on Tuesday, when she's clean, when she subsequently has another re'iyah, she has another zivos emission, she's only timeah from the time of that zivos. And Rabbi Yossi, in other words, this is quite fascinating. Listen to this for a moment. When the woman is a shomer yom kineged yom, so right, she has her zivos emission on Monday. Now Tuesday is her clean day. So she's, right, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, fine, totally fine. They shech the Karban Pesach in her bath. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she has another zivos emission. So we'll say, the shaila now is, how do you view this emission? Do we say now that it turns out that all of Tuesday was retroactively a Zava day? A Zava day. And therefore it turns out that when they offered up the Karban Pesach on her behalf, she was a Zava. She was a Zava. In which case, not only could she not eat the Karban Pesach that night, but in reality she wasn't fit to be part of the Chabura at the time of the Shechita, in which case she has to do Pesach Sheni. Rabbi Yossi says, no, we don't look at it that way. Rabbi Yossi says, we look at it mikano lahaba. Tuesday was fine, which means for part of Tuesday, she technically wasn't a Zava. It's only from the time of the emission and on that we view her as an active Zava. Therefore, Rabbi Yossi says, technically speaking, at the time of the Shechita, she was fit, so to speak. She was okay. It's just now, so therefore, at the time of the Shechita, the time of the Zrika, she was fine. Therefore, she fulfilled her obligation to be part of the Chabura. Now, she had another emission. She's a Zava again. She can't eat. But that's why Rabbi Yossi has nothing to do with Tzitz Meratza. This has to do with how you understand Tumah. Is it a retroactive state, or is it a present future state? So the Gemara says, Zav bal shtei re'iyos sheshachtu v'zarka la b'shvi shalo. But one second, what about the following situation? Rabbi Yossi says as follows: a zav who had 2 re'iyos, right? So now a zav who had 2 re'iyos, 2 emissions, sheshachtu v'zarku alav b'shvi shalo. So we'll say, so what happens? So now he had 2 re'iyos, he's observing 7 clean days. So what happens? They go ahead and they do shchita and zrika for him on his 7th day. V'acher kach ra'ah. And then Rabbi say, so again, 7th day, he's totally clean, he's good to go. And then after the time of the Shechita and the Zrika, he has another Re'iyah. He has another Re'iyah. V'yachar kach ra'ah, v'chein shomeres yom kineged yom sheshachtu v'zarka aleh b'sheni shalah, v'yachar kach ra'asa. And same thing, let's say you have a woman who had a Re'iyah on Monday, and then is observing a clean day on Tuesday. And Tuesday's Erev Pesach, they did the Shechita and the Zrika on her behalf, and then afterwards, she has another emission. Hari elu mitamin mishkav umoshav l'mafreya. Both say it's pretty explicit. Anything they sat on or rested their weight on over the course of that entire day, right? Even earlier in that day, is tameh. So you see that we applied your tumah state retroactively. But yet, interestingly enough, upeturim milasos pesach sheni. But I will say, interestingly enough, for some reason, they are exempt from offering up Pesach Sheni. So it appears that Rabbi Yossi holds that halacha l'maisa, when let's say this woman has her emission on Tuesday, on her clean day, we apply that tumah status retroactively. So first of all, we apply retroactively, but second of all, the bigger question is, if you apply retroactively, then what? What should be the halacha regarding Karban Pesach? What should be the halacha? She shouldn't be Yotzei. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, no. Ma'ila mafreya midrabanan. I will say, fascinating. Rabbi Yossi is midrabanan. There's just, we apply our rabbinic stringency. In other words, halacha l'mais, Rabbi Yossi holds that when a woman has an emission on her second day, or when the Zav has it at the end of the Shiva Nikiyim, we don't back up Tumah status retroactively. But rather, again, what we do is your Tumah status is impacted from the time of the Re'iyah going forward. And that's why, boss, is really quite interesting. That's why you could have this situation of the Shomeres Yom Keneged Yom, where her clean day is Erev Pesach, and as long as she is clean at the time of the Shechita and the Zrika, ultimately she's yot to the Korban Pesach. And therefore, even if she has another emission which precludes her from eating the Pesach that night, halacha lemaisa, she is exempt from Pesach Sheni. What do you do about the fact that Rabbi Yossi says that she's metame mishkav umoshav lemafreya? Midrabanon. That's a stringency. It's a rabbinic chumrah. It's really quite fascinating. V'af Raboshia savar nitma lemafreya midrabanon. Even Raboshia, who subscribes to this idea that there's a tuma lemafreya midrabanon. By the way, say, I want to point out, you know that this discussion of how you go ahead and look at tumah. Do you only look at it mikanot lahabal lemafreya? But say this is not just by zivos, right? This is the first Mishnah Maseches Nida, right? This is the machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about when becomes a nida. So do we assume that she becomes a nida now going forward, or do we have to back up her status retroactively to some prior point? So again, this is a yesodistic machlokes when it comes to Tuma. So the Gemara goes like, Raboshia holds that really mi'ikar adin, your tamei status changes from the time of the re'iyah going forward. But midrabanan, we will back up your status. This sign Raboshia Omer, aval zov shira b'shvi shalos osra shalafanav, when a zav has an emission on his seventh day, right? So he's observing Shiv, right? 7 days. So ultimately, again, the Riyah on that 7 days, so it goes ahead and, totally negates the days that came before. Rabbi Yochanan, lo yister ela yomo. Rabbi Yochanan says, I don't understand. Really, when a Zav has a Riyah on day number 7, he should only lose day number 7. After all, if ultimately, again, if you hold that halacha lemaisa tuma goes back retroactively, so ultimately you should lose everything. But ultimately, again, if you hold that halacha lemaisa tuma only impacts you going forward, you shouldn't even lose the whole 7th day. Rather, again, what he's saying is you shouldn't lose anything, and not even the day. Why not? From the Rabbi Yossi kai kavasech. But how can you say that Rabbi Yossi would subscribe to this idea that she wouldn't lose the 7th day after Rabbi Yossi holds that when there is a re'iyah, the re'iyah causes tumah retroactively, mishkav Moshe for that day, and lav shmamina, metame lemafreya midrabanan shmamina. Another Rabbi Yossi, you see that Rabbi Yossi holds of this idea that halacha lemaisa, when you go ahead and you have a re'iyah, the re'iyah only impacts things going forward, but midrabanan, we will back up the tumah. So therefore, I will say, an interesting, without getting into all of the intricacies of tumah and Taira right now, but you find another fascinating Korban Pesach case. So we see then a situation of a Shomeres Yom Keneged Yom, right, of this woman who was observing a clean day corresponding to a day in which she experienced an emission, and if the clean day is Erev Pesach, as long as at the time of the Pesach she has not had an emission on her clean day, and they do the Shrita and the Zrika on her behalf, even if she subsequently has an emission on that day, which now means she will not be able to eat the Korban Pesach that night, she will have fulfilled the mitzvah of Korban Pesach since she was fit at the time of the Shechita and the Zrik, even though she can't eat it, and halacha l'maisa, she is exempt from Pesach Sheni. So a really fascinating case where a person could be fit at the time of Shechita and Zrika, unfit to consume, but yet still fulfill their obligation and be exempted from Pesach Sheni. And introduced to this idea that Rabbi Yossi, who says, again, that the Re'iyah only impacts you going forward, will extend the Tumah retroactively, but only midrabanan. Quite fascinating. So Rabbi Yossi, current Rabbi Yossi, Hashtag Damar Mikano Labo Mentame, so current Rabbi Yossi, who holds that halacha l'maisa, Tumah generally impacts you present going forward. So the Gemara says, when the Brisa said that this only applies to Tumas Meis, what was the Brisa coming to exclude? Nifshot mina tebekoin v'huchla tumas hatahom. It must be that he's coming to include the case, or coming to exclude or include the case of a Kohen, and coming to tell us that halacha l'maisa, that even a Kohen who becomes tamei tumas hatahom, the tzitz is not. So let's remember again, that's actually the question we're dealing with. I know it's easy to get carried away with zivos and shemaras yom kineged yom, right? But l'maisa, remember the question we're actually focused on over here is the Mishnah told me that the tzitz is meratza on tumas hatahom, and that refers to tumas hatahom of the bailim, of the owner of the karban. We're trying to figure out what about if the Kohen himself contracts tumas hatahom. So the Gemara says, "Amar li olim b'bailim Pesach." No, in reality, we're still talking about the owners in karban Pesach. Says the Gemara, "V'kasavra in shochtin v'zarkin al tmei sheretz." And rather, what the Brayz is coming to teach us is that halacha l'maisa, we don't shecht or do zrika for people who are tamei with tumas sheretz. So the Gemara says, "V'itzterich limiute," and I have to go ahead and exclude tumas sheretz from tumas tahom. That it could very well be that what the Brayz is coming to teaching is that the concept of tumas tahom, which means again this type of tuma, which according to Rashi means safek, according to the Gemara we're going to see means something that was kind of unavoidable, you could not have expected. The tzitz is meratza for this type of tuma, but the only type of tuma that falls into this category is tumas meis, not tumas sheretz. El Rabbi Yossi, Zava Gimura Heichem Mishkacha. So this is very interesting. See, according to Rabbi Yossi, you come up with an incredible tuma anomaly, which is Rabbi Yossi holds that halacha l'maisa, when a person has a re'iyah, a woman has a re'iyah, a man has a zivos re'iyah, right? Zava. So both say that re'iyah only impacts your status from this point going forward. From this point going forward, it doesn't impact your status retroactively. Well, if that's the case, then how does a woman ever become a Zava Gidola? In other words, they're both saying that halacha l'mais, remember again, what's a Zava Gidola? A woman who has consecutive re'iyos, right? 2 days of re'iyos, she has to observe 7 clean days. So the Gemara says, if we kind of don't back up your status, that means the re'iyos themselves are never connected. If they're never connected, then halacha l'mais, how do you ever become a Zava Gidola? To which the Gemara says, b'shofas, it could be where a woman constantly bleeds in an uninterrupted fashion for multiple days. Or you see 2 consecutive ben hashmashos periods. So if you see 2 consecutive ben hashmashos periods, that ultimately again links a total of 3 different days in your re'iyah. Okay, just the detail that the Gemara is following up on. By Rav Yosef, Kohen amaratza b'tamid. Supposed to listen to this. So a Kohen who is doing the avoda by a karban tamid. Right, so now we're switching gears just a moment to tamid. So a Kohen is doing the avoda by karban tamid. Hutralo tumas hatahom. Olo. We'll say, so now again, we're switching gears for just a moment. The Kohen is performing the avoda of the tamid, right? Daily communal offering. He does the avoda, and then it turns out that's what? He was on lunch break, and he sat down on a pile of stones, and it turns out that's what? There was a corpse underneath the pile of stones. There was no way he could have known about it, but halacha l'maisa, it turns out that effectively he did the avoda in a state of Tuma. In a state of Tuma. So says the Gemara, Imtim, so what's the halacha? So is the tzitz miratza for his avoda or not? So the Gemara says, Imtim, salamar koin amaratza v'karban hosein shalaz javosa pesach chutzlo tumas hatahom koin amaratza b'tamid mai. So both say, so again, so now, if you want to tell me, if we accept, which we didn't prove, but if you want to say that the tzitz is miratza for tumas tahom of a koin by Pesach, okay, so what's the implication of that legabe tamid? Mai mi aminan ki gemiri tumas hatom bePesach betamid lo gemiri o dilma yolif tamid mi Pesach. So we'll say here's the shaila. The shaila is halacha lemaisa. Can we say that we can learn out tamid from Pesach? So the Gemara says Amarab kal v'chomer. Rabbi says yes, we can. It's a kal v'chomer. What's the kal v'chomer? So listen to this. Uma b'makom shelo hutrala tuma yidua hutrala tumas hatahom. Both in a situation where tuma yidua, known tuma, the tzitz is not miratza, but yet the tzitz is miratza for tumas hatahom. So we'll say now, what does that mean? What makom? Look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, last line of Rashi, makom shelo hutrala tuma yidua klal ki go nazir v'oseh pesach shein karbanos yachid. So I will say, for example, For example, we'll say, if a Kohen knew he was Tameh, he is not permitted to perform the service of the Karban Pesach. But yet, again by Pesach, if the Kohen contracted Tumas Hatahom, the tzitz is Meratza. Makom shehutra lo Tuma Yedua. So Rabbi say, in a situation where ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, even if the Kohen knew he was Tameh, he could still do the avoda. Then Rabbi say, now what the Gemara is assuming over here is if all of the Kohanim were Tamein, halacha l'maisa, they could offer up the carbon. They could offer up the carbon tabin. Rabbi said, now I know what you're thinking. You're saying to yourself, 1 second, the same halacha applies to carbon pesach. So remember, Rabbi say, here's the distinction. We've already seen by carbon pesach, the concept that the carbon could be offered up in a state of tumah does not apply to all forms of tumah. Right? It only applies to what? Mace and sheretz. Right? It does not apply to let's say zivos or other forms of tumah. Interestingly enough, by carbon tamid, let's say all of the kohanim were tamei tumas zov, for argument's sake. Saloch l'maisa, they could offer up the tamid. So what the Gemara is suggesting is like this: by carbon pesach, there are certain by what we call tuma yedua, by known tuma, the kohen could not offer it up. Yet the tzitz is meratza by tumas hatzahom. That's by carbon pesach. So tamid shehutra lo tuma yedua. So by tamid, Rabbi say, let's say well, all the kohanim are zovim. Halacha l'maisa, they can go ahead and offer up the carbon. Amud beis eino din shehutra lo tumas hatzahom. It should go without saying that halacha l'maisa, the tzitz should be meratza for tumas tahom by tamid. So the Gemara says, 1 second. So again, it's a good kal v'chomer. There's only one problem. Amri umi dainin and kal v'chomer mehalacha. They both say the concept of tumas tahom is a halacha l'Moshe misinai. You can't make kal v'chomers based on halacha l'Moshe misinai. In other words, both saying because halachos l'Moshe misinai are considered to be unique, they can't be used as the foundation to teach me something else. They are standalone halachas that cannot be utilized as part of a kal v'chomer. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Me halacha kigon kever tumas hatahom halacha l'Moshe misinai benazra oseh Pesach. So I will say this is a unique halacha tumas hatahom. You cannot use it as a foundation, as a building block to learn halacha. So in other words, you can't use tumas hatahom by Pesach, well it's Pesach and Nazir, to go and learn out from Talmud because it's halacha l'Moshe misinai. After all that time, I'm going to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Akiva, etzem kisor halacha, revius dam kal v'chomer. So I will say, so just to give you the background to this a little bit, look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi, it's the next Rashi, mi daininan kal v'chomer mehalacha. So I will say, if you skip down in that Rashi a little bit, it's Rashi third line down from the top. If you skip into that Rashi a couple of lines, you'll see 2 dots. The Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Akiva b'Meseches Nazar Darmin al Hasam Revius Dam Ein HaNazir Megala Amaga V'Amasa V'Kar Rabbi Akiva Kal V'Chomer. So also listen to this. The halacha is that if a Nazir comes in contact with a revius of dam, right, with a revius of blood, that does not, bring his neder nazirus to a screeching halt and require him to start over. Now, Rabbi Akiva argued on that. Rabbi Akiva argued on that principle based on a kal v'chomer. What was his kal v'chomer? Uma etzem kisor she'enu metame esa adam ba'oel anazir megaleach hamaga. So we'll say, Rabbi Akiva says like this. If you have a bone fragment, right, the bone fragment the size of a barley kernel, which by itself does not convey tumas ohel, yet if a nazir comes in contact with it, it ends his neder nazirus and he must start all over again. So certainly again a revius of dam, which if you are under the same roof as a revius of dam, you do contract tumas mace, certainly should bring the neder nazirus to a screeching halt. So I will say it's a pretty solid kal v'chomer, except Rabbi Akiva. But the halacha, the Gemara says, etzem kisara halacha revius dam kal v'chomer. So I said the concept that a bone fragment the size of a barley kernel is metame is a halacha l'Moshe misinai. So because it is halacha l'Moshe misinai, it cannot be used as part of a kal v'chomer. Ve'in done in kal v'chomer mehalacha. Rabbi say we do not make a kal v'chomer from a halacha l'Moshe misinai. Ela amar Rava yalif mo'adam mi Pesach. Rather, Rabbi say the Gemara says enochinam yirayif. Remember again, what's the shaila? The shaila over here is Does tumas tahom apply to carbon tamid or not? So Gemara wanted to make a kal v'chomer, which was a good kal v'chomer. Only one problem: tumas tahom is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. You can't make a kal v'chomer based on halacha l'Moshe Sinai. The Rishon Gemara says you're right. Rather, again, where do we learn it out from? Ela Amar Rava. Yalif mo'ado mi Pesach. Rabbi say you're right. It's not a kal v'chomer. Instead, it is a gezerah shava. We have mo'ado by Pesach. We have mo'ado by Tamid, which allows me to learn the halachos of Tamid to Pesach. So I will say two pieces of information that come out of here. Number one, Tumas HaTahom does apply to Kohanim. So therefore, again, with the question we started out with in today's shir, which is a Kohen offers up the Karban Pesach. It turns out that during his lunch break, he was sitting down on top of a pile of stones. It turns out there was a corpse buried underneath those pile of stones. No way to foresee that, no way to know that. So that is called Tumas HaTahom. The Kohen ended up offering up the Karban Pesach in a state of Tumah, unbeknownst to him. He finds out afterwards that tzitz is meratzah. The same halacha that applies to the owners of the carbon applies to the Kohen. So I know that it applies to Pesach. Does it apply to carbon tamid? To which the answer is yes. And how do I know that it applies to tamid? Gezerah shava of mo'ado from tamid to Pesach. Beautiful. Tumas HaTahom gufa iksiyah. By the way, Gemara says, just out of curiosity, where does this concept of Tumas HaTahom come from? Right? So we'll say, so here, by the way, I just want to point out to you, the Gemara, right? Chazal are pretty smart. So we'll say, we think about this in just a moment. When you're structuring this sugya, right? We're speaking about Tumas HaTahom, taking it as fact. We're talking about who it applies to. And now the Gemara says, by the way, where do we know it from? Right, where do you know it from? But I say, would it not make more sense to go ahead and structure it a little bit differently? Elamai, Chazal are not just teaching us about Tumas HaTahom. Chazal are also teaching us about what it means to have emunah. And I will say, emunah doesn't mean you understand it and therefore you do it. Emunah means I believe it, and therefore I do it, and I'll come to understand it. I'll strive to understand it. This is one of the most important yisodos in Yiddishkeit. What it means to be an Eved Hashem means I'm committed. Of course, Chalish Baruch Hu gave me intellect. So I want to try to understand everything. Recognizing some things I will, some things I won't. But my understanding is not the prerequisite to my observance or commitment. My commitment is what comes first. My understanding in Mirat Hashem follows. And you see this, I think that this was the hashkafa that Chazal, because Gemara is often set up like this, where we'll spend so much time going through every last detail. And then Gemara says, oh, by the way, how do you know this, right? Where does this concept come from? How do I know the statement that you said to be true is actually true? That's what it means to be a Jew. What it means to be a Jew is, I'm in, I'm committed, Ribono Shalom, I'm yours. I don't know where Tumas Tahom comes from, but if you tell me it's true, I'm in. Right, I'm all over that Tumas Tahom. Right, hopefully not literally, but figuratively. So let's say, and then after the commitment is there, then the understanding comes. An incredible yisod. So Tumas HaTahom gufa heicha ksiva. Both say, by the way, where is Tumas HaTahom from? Right now, both say. Now it's interesting. The Gemara says, where is it written? They both say, now why is this an intriguing question? What did the Gemara just say about Tumas HaTahom? It's halacha Moshe Sinai. If it's halacha Moshe Sinai, both say, where is it written? It's not. It's not. Now, what the Gemara really means to say is, where do you see like an allusion to this concept of Tumas HaTahom, right? Do we see it alluded to somewhere? So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Amar Kra, V'chi Yamos Meis Alav. So we'll say this is by Nazir. The pasuk says, remember, this is a guy who's a Nazir, and what happens? V'chi Yamos Meis Alav. The image literally is, somebody is dropping dead right in front of the Nazir, right? Which of course, again, what's the focus of the pasuk? The focus of the pasuk is not the guy who died. The focus of the pasuk is that now the Nazir has to start his neder nazirus all over. But the Gemara says something very interesting. What's the word alav? If a person will die on him, obviously it doesn't literally mean on him. So what does alav mean? B'mechuveres alav, where it's clear to him that a person died. In other words, this is incredible. Alav, the Gemara understands, means that halacha l'maisa, it is clear to him that the person died. In other words, that there's no ambiguity regarding the circumstances. He sees the corpse. It's clear that he's there. To exclude what? To exclude a case where it's not clear that there's a corpse there, or it's not clear that that a person died. Ashkecha Nazir. So we'll say that pasuk is by Nazir. Osa Pesach Minolan. From where do I know about this concept by Karban Pesach as well? Am Rabbi Yochanan Amakra B'derech Rechoka. B'derech Rechoka Lachem. Because I will say again, the pasuk over here, interestingly enough, is talking about by Pesach Sheni and says Ish Kiyeh Tamei LaNefesh or B'derech Rechoka Lachem. Right? So I will say if a person be Tamei LaNefesh or Derech Rechoka far away Lachem for you. Now the Gemara is going to say that lachem is a modifier that goes back both on tamei and derech rechoka. So what does it mean that it's tamei lachem? Again, b'mechuveres lachem. The case of tumah that we're talking about is a case of tumah which is explicitly clear to you, which is telling you that the case of tumah, which goes ahead and ends in neder naziros, or the case of tumah, which ultimately again will exclude you for karban pesach, is only a case of alav lochem, only where the tumas mace is clear. It's clear. You could see it. It was potentially maybe right. You could see it. Masha'in kein tumas hatahom, which halacha lamaisa you could not see, and you had no reason to expect that corpse was there. So the Gemara says, or Rav Shimon Lakish Kiderach. Rav Shimon Lakish says that Torah is equating by Pesach is equating Tumah to Derech. Tumah to being too far away. Ma Derech Begaloi, just like Rabbi say, if you're too far away, the Derech, that's explicitly clear, you can see that. Af Tumah Nami Begaloi. So to the case of Tumah must be one that is exposed and clear as well. So we'll say really incredible limud. So may say the Gemara is the Kasha, Eizuchu Tumas Hatahom. What's the case of Tumas Hatahom? Kol Shalo Hikir Ba Echad Besofa Olam. This is wild. We're going to explain this more in just a moment. What's the case of Tumas Hatahom? We'll say Tumas Hatahom is a type of Tumah where no one in the world knew about it. No one in the world knew about it. Now, we'll have to define exactly what that means. Hikir Ba Echad Besofa Olam. I'm sorry. Kol Shalo Hikir Ba Echad Besofa. Hikir Ba Echad Besofa Olam. Ein zet tumas hatahom. But if one person in the world was aware of this tumah, that is not called tumas hatahom. So we'll say tumas hatahom means tumah that was unknown to mamish anyone in the world. The Rabbi Lazar the Amar bemechaveres alav adi adahu. Now, according to Rabbi Lazar's shita, right, Rabbi Lazar's exposition, he said chiyamos alav. It just has to be clear to me. So really, it's tumas hatahom as long as what? As long as I didn't know about it. I don't care if anyone else knew about it. As long as there was no way for me to know about it, that's called Tumas HaTahom. Rabbi Yochanan Damar Lachem b'mechaveres Lachem adi yad b'trid. According to Rabbi Yochanan, who understands Tumas HaTahom from Lachem is plural. As long as it was not known to two people, that's called Tumas HaTahom. Rabbi Shimon Lakish Damar Kiderech adi yad kuli alma. According to Rabbi Shimon Lakish, who says, who learns out from Kiderech, just like a road is seen and known, so too again, only Tumah that is seen and known. That sounds like to everyone in the world. Ella, so the Gemara is just pointing out, is that each of the aforementioned drashas seem to have their little bit of ambiguity. Ella, Tumas Hatom Hilchasa Gimirila. Rather, Rabosai, the concept of Tumas Hatahom is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It is not learned out from any of the psukim that we just mentioned. Rather, ukra asmachta ba'alma. We'll say the psukim that are mentioned are an asmachta. So we'll say this is really quite fascinating. So the psukim are there only as a scriptural allusion, but not actually as the source of the halacha. So we'll say so again, the psukim are interesting because they're illustrative. Right? They help us to understand, and that's why both I mentioned before, this is why Rashi's interpretation that Tumas HaTahom is Safek is so difficult in light of the fact that that's not how the Gemara itself is interpreting it. But again, Pei Kasha and Rashi. In any event, what comes out of Rabbi Say is that Tumas HaTahom means Tumah that I did not see. And there was no way for me to see it. It was simply unavoidable tumah because I could have never expected that tumah was present in this particular circumstance. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, we see Abba said that it applies to Nazir Pesach because that's again where the halacha l'Moshe Misinai was taught, and based on the Gzera Shava of Moado, it also applies to Karban Tamid. Incredible. But let's go a little bit weiter. Amar Bravashi. Lo shano ela shano dolo la'achar zrika. The chi is darik, dom shapir is darik. So we'll say, so remember again. Now, still focusing on Tumas HaTahom. So we'll say, we've now established that the tzitz is meratze on Tumas HaTahom. But when is the tzitz meratze on Tumas HaTahom? We'll say, when? Only when you found out about the Tumas HaTahom. When? after Zrika. So already, so the Kohen did the avodo, or the owner, the Zrika on the animal was already done. Then I find out about Tumas HaTahom. Okay, then we say that Tzitz is Maratza Tumas HaTahom. So the Gemara says, however, Aval Noda Lo Lifnei Zrika Lo Maratza. Rabbi, listen to this. If you found out, you being either the Kohen or the owner of the Karban, you found out that in fact you had contracted Tumas HaTahom before the Zrika, then what? You can't do the Karban. You can't do the Karban. In other words, that might be different by Tamid, depending on the circumstances. But Allah Chamais, you can't do the Karban. In other words, the Tzitz being Meratza on Tumas HaTahom only works ex post facto. But if you know before the Zrika, before the Shechita, that you have Tumas that you contracted Tumas HaTahom, you can't go any further. In other words, is that true? Meisvei, Hamot, these are, whoever thought that really, that Tuman Tara could be so riveting. We usually find these sugyas and we're like, okay, we skip ahead. How many pages further? But I will say again, you have to pay attention. You have to pay very close attention. You have to follow every single step. But you could mamish get a grasp on the halachos of Tuman Tara from these sugyas. These gemaras are explicitly clear. They're ridiculously clear. They're too clear. It almost takes the challenge out of learning. That's how clear they are. But I will say, but if you hold on to it, mamish, you emerge with an understanding of these sugyas. So the Gemara says, listen to this case. Hamotzi mace, mushkav l'rach bo shal derech. We'll say, get ready for this. This is great. I mean, not great for the mace, but great for us. So the Gemara says, you find the corpse buried across the width of the road. Now, both say, these are Tumas HaTahom cases, right? So meaning, I'm walking, minding my own business. I walk down the road, and sure enough, I see right behind me, they just discovered a corpse. Now, the way the corpse is buried, I will say, is how? Along the width of the road. So we'll say, what does it mean if it's buried along the width of the road? I passed over it, right? So I just walked over a mace, and remember again, walking over a mace is an issue potentially of Tumas Ohel. So the Gemara says, listen to this. So the Gemara says, L'truma tamei, l'nazir va'oseh pesach tar. For truma purposes, I am tamei. But say, look at Rashi for just a moment. It's almost right across. Mushkav l'rach bo shel derech v'u avar sham v'efshar shelo naga shamo. He said, oil. So both say, meaning it's buried in a way where I definitely came in contact with this corpse. Either I touched it, either I moved some part of it, or I stood over it, right? But either way, contact with the corpse was absolutely unavoidable. Okay? So now what does the Gemara say? L'truma tamei. I am not permitted to go any truma. And I will say, why am I not permitted to eat truma? Because the dispensation of Tumas HaTahom, this is the Tumas HaTahom case. Why should I assume that there's someone buried in the road? I have no reason to assume that. So therefore, this is Tumas HaTahom. Tumas HaTahom does not apply by truma. And therefore, if I'm a Kohen, I can't eat truma. However, so the truma tamei, the nazir va'oseh pesach tar. But for Nazir, and so if I'm a Nazir and I walked over this, it does not end my Neder Naziros. And ultimately, again, it sounds like I can still go ahead and proactively offer up my Karban Pesach. So we'll say, look at Rashi, Tamei, the lo hutra lo tumas hatom, be lo arko shel derech. Fine. So we'll say, see, the idea over here is, I can't eat truma. Because tumas hatom, that exemption does not apply by truma. But I am still fit for Nazirus. If I'm a Nazir, it doesn't bring my Neder Nazirus to a screeching halt. And I can still go and offer up my Karban Pesach. So the Gemara says, V'osa Pesach. So the Gemara says, Tar. I'm sorry. So V'osa Pesach Tar. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry. V'chol Tamei V'tar Lahabahu. Now both say, whenever we speak about Tamei and Tar, B'pashtos, that's talking about your status for what? Your status going forward. So we'll say, what does this sound like? If I'm on my way to where? If I'm on my way ultimately again to offer up the Karban Pesach, what does this sound like, Rabbi say? What does it sound like? That I can still offer it. So here's a case of where I know I've contracted Tumas Tahom. And yet, again, what does this sound like? I am still permitted to go ahead and go and offer the Karban. You just told me that the exemption for Tumas Tahom, Rabbi say, is only what? Ex post facto. If I found that after the Zrika, doesn't sound like that here. Here it sounds like you could actually continue to go and do the Karban. Rather, again, if you wanted, here's what you have to say. Lo tema no lo la'achar zriku de meratze, aval no dohu lifnei zrika lo meratze, ela afilu No dalo lifnei zrika maratza. We'll say this is absolutely wild. To which the Gemara says, do you want to see the expansive nature of Tumas HaTahom? That Allah Lamaisa, not only is the tzitz meratza for you ex post facto, right? You did the shchita, you did the zrika, then you found out you contracted Tumas HaTahom, that the carbon is effective. But Rabbi say, even Allah Lamaisa, what? Even if you're on your way. So even if you're a Nazir, you just found out you contracted Tumas HaTahom, you're fine. You're on your way to offer up your Korban Pesach, and you found out that you contracted Tumas HaTahom, you are still permitted to carry on with the Karban. Now, Bosai, we'll have to stop over here because I feel like we should leave a little bit of Tumas HaTahom for tomorrow also. It's too good to say goodbye to it. We'll see Emir Hashem, Bosai, the halachic parameters of that. We'll see how it applies to Karban Pesach. And Emir Hashem will see about how it applies proactive versus reactive Emir Hashem tomorrow. Shkach, Bosai. Amen.